And hi again, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you as we come to you again live on a Monday night. We're going to talk a lot of baseball tonight, a lot of classic baseball, and we're going to bring on our first guest who has written a great book about two of the legends of the game. He's had a lot of writing experience writing about the Yankees, written a book about Mickey Mantle before, about Joe DiMaggio and other Yankee books, and we're joined tonight, Don, by Tony Castro, the author of the book, Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud. So we're going to talk some vintage baseball tonight. First of all, Don, good to have you back. Glad you're feeling better. I know you had a little situation last week, but it sounds like you're doing better.
Yeah, it's everything's under control. And, Tony, great to talk with you. And you got quite a resume there from Texas to California to the West Coast, and a Yankee fan, I guess, from day one, huh?
Pretty much so. My old man was a big Joe DiMaggio fan. He had delayed his homecoming going to Texas back after World War II in 1945. DiMaggio wasn't playing for the Yankees, but he stayed in New York with some buddies to watch the Yankees finish the season there before going home. People thought he was lost and whatever, but no, he was just he lost with the Yankees.
Yeah,
so that's where my obsession
Doug will tell you. I did an interview with Joe DiMaggio, which runs on our show every now and then. It's on our podcast, obviously, and had great success talking to Joe. He was very nice to me and had a great. But I go from Halberstam in 1949 now to you, Tony. So I've covered the range.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah, Don, that's one of the rare interviews of Joe D on radio. It's still getting a lot of hits on our YouTube channel, but he didn't do a lot of interviews. Did you get a chance? I don't know if you wrote it while he was still alive, the book about Joe, or did you get a chance to talk to him at all, Tony?
In 1978, when I first came to Los Angeles, one of the first things I did was to go up to San Francisco, and somebody arranged a meeting with DiMaggio there, Lefty O'Doul, and DiMaggio and one of his friends and I became, I wouldn't say buddies, but we hung around quite a bit. I'm Mexican-American, but they thought I was Italian because my name's Tony, and I think that's one of the things that's real often forgotten about DiMaggio is that, his ancestry, his background, and how much that influenced who he was and the way he behaved and the way he was in New York. I mean, a little bit of the book about DiMaggio and Mick had to do with that part. And I'm working on a biography of DiMaggio right now that goes, it's heavily into his Italianness. It's sort of, for lack of a better description, The Godfather meets The Natural.
You're right. Was a gentleman that you worked with? I had a lot of contact with him over the years. Was Al Campanis' leading scout, Eddie Liberatore. He was always with Joe. Was he the fellow you're talking about?
He was one of those. No, it was. God, I'm drawing this single moment here. It was Barsacchini. I can't think of his first name. He was with Joe. He was even the one who helped Joe clean out his home after he and Marilyn broke up. Reno Barsacchini. That was his name.
Oh, okay. Well, we want to talk about the current book. Of course, Joe D played with a little bit with Lou Gehrig. Came up just as Gehrig was still in the league. But let's talk about Lou Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud is the full title of the book. Again, our friends at Triumph Books put this out. But first of all, how'd you get involved in this project, and how'd you do the research on it?
I did the Mickey Mantle biography that you were alluding to, and it came out in 2002. And then we contracted with a different company for this book, Gehrig and the Babe, whereas at that time it was Ruth and Gehrig, and did a great deal of research at that time. That company went under, the book kind of languished, and after I did the DiMaggio and Mick book, came out in 2016, I said, well, I've got this one here that we can play with, and new things had been added to that, and so the research on that, I hung around with people who knew and played with Ruth, the same way with Gehrig. And so that was helpful. But a lot of it was just going through the old files, the newspaper files and clippings, and reading about those and trying to recreate the scenes there. And so I was very fortunate in I know when I was coaching Little League out here with my kids, one of the guys that I became very close to was a guy named Jimmy Reese, who had played with Babe and Ruth back in the early 30s. He had even roomed with Babe Ruth, or tried to. He said rooming with Babe Ruth was just saying hello and goodbye, because Ruth was hardly ever around.
Well, it was certainly a difference in personalities. I mean, Lou Gehrig going to Columbia, had a college education, and of course the Babe was almost a circus character in the sense that he was a rough rider. And so I can see where, as most of us know by now, that their personalities really did clash.
Yeah, but that's true, but some of that is misleading. You know, we only went to Columbia for 1 year, and he didn't have a very good time there. He resented much of what we usually ascribe to him as being Columbia Lou. He didn't like that nickname. He felt out of sorts. He felt like he didn't belong, an outsider for the most part at Columbia. Those were the days when there's a very unique class of people that attended the Ivy League, unless you were there on scholarship, and that's what Gehrig was, and he resented those differences that were there. And he was only there for 1 year,
right?
His freshman year, and after that he signed with the Yankees. And you know, Ruth, what can you say? I mean, that reputation was well earned.
Yeah, reading through the book, you get the real feeling as you describe it. Lou Gehrig comes up. The Babe had already been with the Yankees, been with Boston before that, of course, and he was a big star. So Lou always kind of felt a little bit in awe of the Babe, right? You talk about when they first met. Lou kind of just stayed in the background. I think Babe called him Kid, right? Keed or something like that. He never really knew anybody's name. Yeah.
Well, the Babe was Gehrig's hero. There was a difference in ages, and so there was never any sense of real equality among them. I mean, in 1923, when Gehrig signed with the Yankees, Ruth was already a big star. In 1925, when Gehrig broke in and became the regular first baseman, something that went on for a record number of games in a number of years, even at that time, Babe was still even bigger than life. Babe Ruth wasn't just an ordinary baseball player. He was like a god. He was like a Christ. And so anybody in that same lineup or in that same clubhouse had to take a back seat, whether they liked it or not, to Babe Ruth. Gehrig's part was that his personality was such that he didn't mind that.
Tony, did they lock her next to each other? That's one thing I never really talked to anybody about, whether or not they were split up in the clubhouse or whether they were right next to each other.
At the beginning, they weren't right next to each other. Then for a while they were, and then they were split up again. And, that wasn't so much what really mattered there when they bonded in, say, 25, 26, 27. They spent a lot of nights, because it's day baseball when they were in town. I mean, so you had the nights free. And a lot of nights were spent over at the Gehrig house. Babe loved to eat, and he loved Mrs. Gehrig's food. And so Babe was like I wouldn't say she was a second son, but she certainly loved having Babe around. She often cooked meals especially for him.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, the players would go over, Lou's house. Lou's mother, almost like the team mother in a sense, right?
Mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She liked doing that.
And I mean, she had the distinction of going to spring training when nobody else's mom would go to spring training. She was right there for several years. No one seemed to mind. Her presence was there all the time. Lou wasn't married at the time in the 20s, so Mrs. Gehrig and his father would sit with the Yankee wives, and where the Yankee wives would sit. But her role was one of not only his mom, but his representative, his significant other, as it were, because at the time he was he was known as the most eligible bachelor in Manhattan.
Well, the one thing you bring up when you talk about going to each other's houses, or primarily to Gehrig's house, people don't realize that all the way up through the Dodger dynasty in the 50s and so forth, all the players just took subways or took the bus to the ballpark or drove in 2 or 3 cars together. I mean, it was altogether different than what we have right now.
It is. I mean, the salaries were different. So many of these ball players lived in some of the neighborhoods that were just traditional middle-class neighborhoods. I mean, that was what I was alluding to on DiMaggio, that when he was when he came up in 1936, when Gehrig was still there, DiMaggio's first friends were people were Italians. They spoke the same language. Joe was very shy, and the option that he had was eating meals either at the hotel or at a restaurant, and he preferred the meals at some of these home-cooked meals that he would get in Little Italy there.
The other thing was that when you talk about the Italian heritage, and that's what is really the strongest that there is, they are very, very close in everything that they do. And but the Yankees were a big part of that. In fact, the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Giants all had one nationality, one individual player from each nationality, and the Yankees always had more, with Frankie Crissetti and
Tony Lazzari,
and so on,
yeah.
And then of course Joe Pepito later on. The Yankees always wanted to involve themselves with the Italian community because it was a very big baseball community.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely that. I mean, you had this contingent from San Francisco, and then even later, not that K.T. Stengel was Italian, he wasn't, but he had that California connection. And so you had, Billy Martin, another Californian, and another Italian.
Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud. We're talking with Tony Castro, again published by Triumph Books. I know you talk about it in the book, Tony. The classic movie I think every baseball fan has seen, Pride of the Yankees, starring Gary Cooper, about Lou Gehrig. But not all of it exactly factual to 100%. It's a great movie, but not exactly what happened, right? A lot of it.
Well, yeah, but then it's Hollywood, and more and more we're seeing how these things, whether it's the movie Lincoln or others, that you take liberties because of the need that Hollywood feels like it has to take. And with the Gehrig movie, interestingly enough, Gehrig's widow had veto power on that, and she didn't. After she saw the rough cut and then saw the finished cut, she had no objection to anything that was in there. It was pleasing. It was, if you've seen it, I'm sure you have. I mean,
sure.
How can you object to it? I mean, it's
a great movie, but it's not exactly factual. Right.
God, no, obviously not. And there was some.
Well, the other thing too is that Gary Cooper did an excellent job in playing Lou Gehrig, and of course the finale, obviously, the speech he said, "Live Forever." But in the case of the Babe, I mean, the character that plays Babe Ruth in the movie,
George Bendix, wasn't it?
Pardon?
George Bendix, is that the actor? William Bendix, rather. He played him in one movie. William Bendix.
William Bendix, who was really a comedian.
Terrible.
I mean, he wasn't as...
No, that was in the Babe Ruth. That was in the Babe Ruth story.
Yeah, that was a terrible movie about Babe. Although the Babe did appear in the Lou Gehrig movie as he was himself.
Yeah, well, he played himself.
Did a good job in it too. Yeah,
and he had problems with it. I mean, that's how I opened the book. I opened the book with Babe Ruth is talking to a guy who's known as the mayor of Hollywood, which Hollywood's not its own city. It was an honorary position. And the little fellow who was the longtime mayor of Hollywood, a guy named Johnny Grant, befriended Babe Ruth on the making of the Gehrig movie. And they became pals over the years. And I had befriended Johnny Grant shortly after I came here. And at one point, in going through I was helping Johnny put together his 50 Years in Hollywood documentary about himself. I'm going through old pictures of him with every movie star there was to be photographed with. I see him with Babe Ruth. It's like, tell me more. And so he started telling me about how he met Babe on the set of this movie and how Babe was very upset about the making of it and how it was being made. Babe didn't understand the movie magic involved. And he also, Gary Cooper, who was a big cowboy star at that time.
Right.
They were going to make this film with Gary Cooper. And Gary Cooper was not athletically gifted at all. They had to teach him to, practically had to teach him the game. And worse than that, he was a right-handed hitter. They couldn't teach him to hit left-handed. So the way they solved that was the way that was almost comical. They had him hit right-handed throughout all the scenes in the movie. They reversed everything. And what they did was he would hit right-handed, and he would run to third base. And third base became like first base, and then second base was still second base, but first base became third base. They reversed the film, and it made it look like he was hitting left-handed going to first base. But there were other problems involved in that because the numbers had to be, if you're shooting them,
you got to be reversed,
and reversing them, everything has to, the Yankees logo had to be reversed, the numbers had to be reversed, the cap, the logo on the caps had to be reversed, and Johnny was telling me about and describing the scene where Babe's very upset about all of this. He can't understand why he's running to third base instead of running to first, and why when he's on first base he's actually on third base having to run to second base from the wrong side. and so he's trying to explain to Babe, it's almost like that who's on first Costello. He's having to explain to him how they're going to do this, and Babe is beside himself. It's sort of humorous, and it got the book off on this, but it was also an anecdote where Ruth was explaining to him that there were so many things that he had wanted to say to his friend at the end and hadn't been able to because they had been effectively enemies the last few years of their lives. From the time of when the feud started, which was after the 1932 season, and that was the season where Babe supposedly called the shot in Chicago. Yeah. The home in Chicago, yeah. For the next 2 years, they hardly ever spoke to one another. Babe's last season with the Yankees was 1934, and after that, he was sold to another team, and he ended his career in a very sad way. But Lou then became the pride of the Yankees. If he wasn't the pride of the Yankees already, he was certainly the hero of the Yankees there in 1935, and coming into 36. 36 is the year that DiMaggio arrived, of course. But
one other thing, and I'd like to hear a couple of things that you picked out yourself that you thought were really interesting points within the book. But going back to what you just said, when you looked at Gehrig and you looked at Ruth and the dynasty of that particular era in Yankee baseball, it's never going to be duplicated.
It isn't, and yet it has been, and it's been better. I grew up on like a lot of kids, post-war boomer babies, Ruth and Gehrig, and you think, my God, that was a phenomenal time. I mean, all the championships they won. Looking back, and when you go and look at this, they won 3 World Series together. 3. I mean, Reggie won 2 for the Yankees. They won 5 here recently with Jeter and that crowd. With Mantle, 7? Yogi Berra, 10. He was part of 10 World Series championships. And you start wondering, what was going on here? Well, of course, at that time, you had to win the whole thing. There were no playoffs. You had to win the pennant to get to the World Series. But even so, in those years that they played together, they only won 3 World Series championships. And in 6 of the other 7 years that they played together, they didn't even finish. To get into the World Series.
Yeah.
I mean, so what was going on there? Part of it was, you had some really good teams in the American League at that time.
Yeah, the Senators were good back then, right? Washington Senators beat them one year,
were
right?
good. I mean,
the Philadelphia Athletics.
Philadelphia A's, right?
Fabulous teams. So
you had better lower echelon teams. I mean, today, even when what you just talked about, the 10 championship seasons by the Yankees. I mean, look at the teams that were really the competition over you had one team in 1954, really, the Cleveland Indians, and the level of competition was nowhere near, in my view, as good as it was during the era of Ruth and Gehrig.
Yeah, it's hard to say, and it's hard to compare. One era with another one.
Right.
Although the 1927 team, is generally acknowledged as the greatest team in baseball. But if I had to bet the house myself, I was telling somebody this the other day, I would take the 1961 Yankees.
Sure.
And Bleacher Report did a few years ago did a great comparison of the two teams, and they figured that on paper the 61 Yankees were better, but they would have taken the 27 Yankees simply because of Ruth and because of McCarthy. And it's like, well,
right.
Okay,
I like the 29 Athletics. I think 29 Athletics fit in that group. They were as good as almost any team you could. And of course, they were big time rivals, obviously, the Yankees, and they had a great team in 29, 30 in that era.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to knock that era. I mean, I always have these incredible arguments with people who say baseball didn't begin until after 1947. Well, we all know what happened in 1947, what's happened since then. But wow, you can't discount these teams from these other great eras.
Tony, I know you talk in the book again, getting back to the feud between Lou and the Babe. A lot of it had to do, I guess, whether it was a misunderstanding or not. Lou Gehrig's wife, Babe Ruth, had dated her. Is that really the crux of the whole feud at one time?
No. That's some people suspect that there might have been something there. The feud goes back to Mrs. Gehrig, Christina Gehrig, the mom. She was very outspoken, and she often was too outspoken. In 1929, Babe Ruth's first wife died in a tragic fire. Babe hadn't been with her in years. He had been with another woman,
right,
a lady named Claire Hodgson, who had been Ty Cobb's girlfriend at one point, years before that. This tragedy opened up the opportunity for Babe Ruth and this girlfriend to wed. And so they married in 1929. They married like 6 weeks or so after the death of the first wife. They married, and they combined their families, as it were. The new Mrs. Babe Ruth had a child of her own, and Babe had an adopted daughter, Dorothy, that he and his first wife had adopted in 1921. These two little girls were as different as Ruth and Gehrig. The little girl who was his wife's natural daughter was into dresses and being very princessy. And there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. And the other little girl was very tomboyish. She loved the outdoors and was always out playing and getting dirty and whatever. She was the one that Mrs. Gehrig, Christina Gehrig, took to. And over the coming years, Mrs. Gehrig developed this idea that somehow Mrs. Ruth, second wife, was not as good to the adopted daughter of Ruth and his first wife as she was to her own. That she favored her own, that she didn't dress the other little girl as well as she did her own. And she expressed these opinions to anyone who would listen to them. And like I was telling you, she would go and be in the Yankee Stadium. She had her own seat in the players' wives' area, and she would sit there and she would pontificate. And word of what she was saying got back to
to the Babe, right? He didn't like it. Yeah.
To Ruth's wife, and then she appealed to Babe. Babe took it up with Gehrig, and they almost came to blows.
Yeah.
They had to be separated in the locker room, in the clubhouse, and that's what really precipitated the whole thing.
There really wasn't anything between the two gentlemen themselves. It was the wife and the mother, basically. That's
it was the wife and the mother.
Yeah.
And it was the mother talking.
Is that always the way, Don?
Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you one thing about that. I've been associated with professional sports almost all my life. The room that they have for the wives, whether it's basketball, baseball, or whatever, is deadly. I mean, they are just the most unbelievable. They cause more trouble. And, that's the Ruth and Gehrig. That goes on into today. I mean, you have... Go ahead. Yeah, it's like Little League moms. I mean, you go to a Little League game, and the moms, oh, God, it can be a terrible place to be. But, right. The only difference is they don't have in most of the pro sports, they have a lounge for them to come in, either before the game or after the game or during the game. And, oh, my God, what a pain in the ass. Well, this is what started it, and it got bad. It got so bad that they weren't even shaking hands when Ruth would hit a home run. I mean, you can go back and see these movie tone
old films
newsreels that used to run every twice a week in theaters. And in those, you would see Babe Ruth crossing home plate, and you'd see Gehrig there shaking his hand, or you'd see if Gehrig was the one who hit the home run, you'd see Ruth crossing home plate, waiting for Gehrig, and together they would go to the clubhouse, to the dugout together. After this feud was hot and heavy, nothing like that. You would have Ruth hitting a home run, coming around the home plate, and you'd see there in the video that Gehrig is looking away so to not have to shake Ruth's hand. And the same way, if it was Gehrig who hit the home run and Ruth happened to be on board, Ruth is not paying any attention to him when Gehrig crosses the plate. There were other little things that fed into that. I mean, a year before this happened, there had been a dispute between the two of them over holding out on a contract. At that time, contracts for most players were on a yearly basis, and Ruth was on a yearly basis having to negotiate for more money, and nobody earned as much money as Babe, and he still wanted more. And in 1930 and 31, he thought that if they held out together, they both wind up with more money. And he had an agreement, he thought, from Lou that they would hold out together. This didn't happen. Now, Lou wound up signing his contract. The contracts would be sent out by mail. Lou took his contract, signed it, sent it back, and Babe's idea of the two of them holding out just didn't hold water. So he was upset about that. Where the thing about the Mrs. of Eleanor Gehrig comes in is that I think there were some people who have speculated that there was something between the two. I never came up with anything like that. There was an incident after the 1934 season. Ruth and Gehrig and some other players and from both leagues decided to go to Japan on a barnstorming.
They went on a barnstorming tour, right?
Barnstorming tours were big at that time, and they paid a lot of money, and it was a way of making more money. Sometimes some of these players would make more money barnstorming than they did in their season contract.
Right.
So on the ship going to Japan, there's a story about how Mrs. Gehrig, Eleanor Gehrig, disappearing, and Lou can't find her anywhere, and he winds up finally tracking her down to Babe's room, where she's talking to Babe about some of the things going on with the feud, supposedly. But Gehrig takes offense to where she's been, pulls her out of there immediately, and it just adds to what's already been going on. Yeah.
Done. We'll wrap it up. You have one more question, and we'll wrap it up with Tony?
No, I'll let you finish it off.
I was going to say that you just kind of broach what I was going to bring up, and you talk about it in the book. I mean, we all kind of knew Babe was a party type of guy, but a little more than even I knew from what you found on the. But he really got around with the ladies.
Oh, it was just, I even write about something that happened in Waco, my hometown. They barnstormed there in the late 20s, and they didn't even spend, they came in from, there were roof teams, and they'd break it up into a roof team and a Gehrig team. They wound up meeting in Waco. They spent the afternoon after the game and the early evening in a hotel there. Ruth, though, did more than just spend the evening there. He had a stroller brought in, and he had a line of women that supposedly, according to the locals there, over a dozen women who were in that line to see Babe Ruth, presumably to get autographs.
He was Wilt Chamberlain before Wilt Chamberlain.
What was it, 10,000 women for Wilt?
He said 20,000 in his book.
20,000. Wow. I mean,
it sounds like the Babe might have rivaled that.
A little bit, but I'll tell you what, he's got a big number. I don't know what the number was, but it was maybe not 20,000, but it was well up there. I'll tell you that.
He didn't get cheated. Let's say that. Yes.
No, he didn't.
Well, Tony Castro, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know we went a little bit more longer than we said, but you got some great stories and a lot more in the book we haven't even touched on. Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud is the full title. Triumph Books is the publisher. Do you have your own website, Tony, you can direct people to, get more information in the book?
TonyCastro.com.
And that's Castro. And, well, Tony,
right.
Pleasure talking to you. Hopefully you can do it again down the road.
And when you finish the next one, give us a call.
I've got a new Mickey Mantle book coming out in the spring.
Great. Yeah, we'll do something with that. Will that be through the same publisher?
No, it's through Lions Press. It's Mickey Mantle, or it's Mantle, the best there ever was.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, maybe just if you can contact us directly, you can just send us an email. I'll give it to you now on the air. That's fine. DougMiles@hotmail.com. Just let us know. We'll have you. We'll schedule you then.
Thank you, Doug.
Great.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Tony, great to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tony Castro, our guest on the show, and a lot of great stories. And Don, we didn't even get to some of the career stats. He has them in the back of the book. People tend to forget, of course, the home runs Babe hit, but he is a lifetime 340 hitter. He just came not too far away from 3,000 hits, something like 2,800 hits in his life. Of course, he was a great pitcher, so people think he was just a big kind of a fat home run guy, but he had a lot of, he was a great hitter.
Well, he was also held the record for the most shutout innings in the World Series.
Right.
Until,
I think Hershiser broke that, right?
That's right. And he was not just gifted as a hitter. He was not just gifted as a home run hitter. He had every phase of the game. He was a great player.
Yeah, I think in the back of the book he has really the full stats of both of them. Yeah, Babe Ruth's hitting stats. He was a lifetime. I'm just getting it accurately. Pitching stats: 94 and 46, and he had only really pitched 4 full years. He had a 23-game season and 24-game season back to back. So, if they had the Cy Young back then, he would have won that. And then the hitting statistics, 342 lifetime batting average, 2,873 hits. If he was a full-time player and he was a pitcher, he would have been a 3,000 hit man. So great stats. People tend to just think of the home runs, but he was an all-around ball player.
Well, after hitting, you talk about driving good runs, but at the same time, they had a great group of players around them, push them up. Tony Lazzeri, as I said earlier, they had a lot of great players around them, and they drove home runs. Boy, oh boy, I don't know what his record is high for. What I think it was like 147, something like that for runs driven into the year.
For a year, yeah. He had 168 runs batted in 1921.
There you are,
165 and 27, 162 and 31. So imagine that. 3 seasons over 160 RBIs, 2,214 total in his career. Unbelievable.
And today, if you watch the game, if somebody hits 240, they're like, boy, this guy's great.
And he didn't strike out. I mean, he struck out, but he didn't strike out a ton of times. I mean,
right.
He never struck out more than 100 times. I'm looking at the stats here. The highest strikeout total he had was 93 back in 1923. Yeah.
As I said to you in 1941 when Joe DiMaggio won the MVP award, beating out Ted Williams, who hit 400 that year, and Joe still won it, and he only struck out 13 times all year.
Yeah, unbelievable. His lifetime strikeouts was less than his home run total, wasn't that for Joe D? Something like 360 strikeouts and 360 home runs, something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but he made contact. I'll tell you that. And he was also really a line drive hitter. He talked about that in our interview that we play once in a while.
Right.
And, he wasn't just a home run hitter. He was a line drive hitter.
Every ball he tried to hit straight rather than with the towering fly. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Just looking quickly at Lou Gehrig's stats, 340 lifetime hitter as well. He batted .423 in his rookie year, believe it that. That was only a few at-bats, but, he batted .374 was his highest seasonal batting in 1928. He had 2,721 hits. He would have been a 3,000 hit man, obviously, if he hadn't gotten ill. And over 500 home runs he would have had, too. He finished with 493 and almost 2,000 RBIs. So unbelievable numbers these guys put up.
Yep. Well, it's great talking to Tony. Great reminiscing a little bit. A little before our time, I remember them, after they had finished their careers, and I can still remember Babe Ruth of the closing ceremonies they had when they honored him at Yankee Stadium, and by that time he was so hoarse.
When he made the speech, about the throat feeling really bad. Yeah, that was kind of sad.
Had the big camel hair coat on, and
right.
He was just a shadow of himself. But I know, obviously, I don't remember them playing, neither do you, but
no.
It's great to read about them, great to know the kind of ability that they had, and the fact that their number is going to live for a long, long time.
Yeah, thanks again to our friends at Triumph Books for providing Tony with us tonight. We want to have it's kind of a special show, just talking old Yankee baseball. Let's do a couple of minutes, of course, on the Yankees today. Don, they celebrated their 20th anniversary of the '98 team. Speaking of great teams of all time, the 114-win team that won it all over the weekend. I don't know if you had watching that on TV.
Yeah, I did, and of course, they were killers when they got to the playoffs.
Oh yeah,
and it was one of the spectacular teams of all time, and it's going to be interesting as this season progresses. Now Didi went down yesterday with a bruised heel.
The heel,
Judge is already out. They have a lot of people that are on the shelf. CC Sabathia hoping to come back next Friday.
Judge is still out with the wrist, but he'll be out a couple more weeks.
If they get everybody back, they may be able to make a run in the playoffs. But Boston is just so good that it would be a little unfortunate if they set the record for the all-time wins for a season, and then they pull a clunker, like Cleveland did a few years ago. Not only Cleveland, but
Seattle.
When
Seattle, remember with Lou Piniella, they won like 115 or something. Yeah, right.
Yeah. The Yankees beat them and
knocked them right out. Yeah.
Yeah. So anything can happen. Lou Piniella, was counting the wins, and all of a sudden he's sitting on the sidelines watching the World Series.
Is he still involved with the Yankees at all, Don? He was doing some broadcasting, but I haven't heard his name in a while. Do you know?
No, I do not. I don't think he really has anything to do with them that I know of.
Yeah, I haven't heard his name in a while. I don't know if he was doing anything with them at all. Yeah. So.
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
I haven't even heard his name mentioned.
No.
Even down in even in your area, down in Tampa.
See, he lives in Tampa, or had. So
yeah,
I wondered.
He's born and raised. We don't even hear much when you talk about the Rays. You don't hear much contact about Lou Piniella with. Going to Rays games or seeing.
I think he's trying to forget those 3 years he managed. He didn't quite work out the way. I know he did it because I believe his dad was ill at the time, and he took the job to be near his dad. I think that's the reason he took it.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know how Cash is doing it. How's he's over 500 with that team? Boy,
doing a good job. They shut out the Red Sox yesterday, right?
Yeah, 2-0. Yeah, incredible. With the pitcher that they got from the Red Sox, I think in the trade.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing.
Cash will get another job with a better team down the road. From this job he's done here, he's kind of like Joe Madden in a sense. He will get another.
I think that's a great comparison. Yeah. I think he's done a lot of the things, a lot of innovative things that he's done. He knows how to play small ball, which and then when you got into rotating relief pitchers all the way through the. How he's been able to do that and be that successful, I just can't believe it.
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap it up at that. Of course, we're going to find out about Urban Meyer apparently on Wednesday. That just came down the wire before we went on. So they got the result. They got the investigation in. They're going to meet on Wednesday. So we'll find out.
Yeah, I saw that on ESPN on the late sports line last night at Sports Center, and they said Wednesday was going to be the day. I'll be shocked. I'll be shocked if they fire him.
Yeah, I don't think they'll fire him at this point. They would have done it already.
They may fine him. They may give him some suspension for a couple of games, but I can't imagine that they're going to let Urban Meyer go.
Yeah, unless there's something, a bombshell in that report that we don't know about. Right. I think I even saw a story that it could be like time served. Whatever time he's been out, that'll be it. So, who knows? But I'm not a fan of his.
He's going to be like the president of CBS. Everybody else is going to get
Les gets away with it. Yeah.
But Les is going to get a pass. I guarantee you.
I haven't heard any more about that. I guess that is over, unless there's some lawsuit brewing. But I haven't heard any more about the old Les story. So.
Oh no, they put that.
That's it.
Down as far as they could go. They're going to come out with a glossy review. Probably in a week or so, I'll say, well, a lot of this happened so many years ago, we can't really substantiate anything, and so we're going to give Les a pass.
Les gets a pass. Oh well, because they operate by different rules than the rest of us. I always think karma wins out in the end, though. So. Yeah. Oh, well. Well, that'll wrap it up for this edition, and I know you'll probably more, obviously, on your Wednesday show you do with the guys up in Tampa, so you can you'll have a lot about Urban, I'm sure, to talk about then, so we'll follow that.
Will do.
But we'll have more to talk about next week as we head into college football, unbelievably, week after next. I know USF. I just got my press pass for USF, Don, so they open up against the always tough Elon team on the 1st of September at home.
That Elon school is really a growing school. A growing school. It's right next door to where my son lives in.
I didn't know it was in North Carolina until I looked it up. Yeah,
it's Burlington. It's right outside of Burlington, North Carolina, and it's holy smokes, it's a great school and growing by leaps and bounds, and they're trying to get more involved in the basketball, very involved in basketball and now football. So it's a school that's on the come. I don't know that they're going to be ready to win anything, this quickly, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they were 8-4. They were 8-4 last year. I did a little research on them, and their head coach just started last year. Went 8-4. He was a former assistant to Nick Saban, so they're trying to do something there. You're right with football.
Yeah, the president of Elon lives right across the street from my son. So
oh, great!
He's very much involved. Even though he's a North Carolinian, he's very much involved in Elon too. He goes to a lot of their games.
Yeah, we'll do.
All right, my man. Good to do it. We'll do it.
We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening, everybody.